a magical land where spin and advertising run free. We'll meet our panel in a moment, but first, in product placement news, James Bond disappointed fans in 2008 by swapping his upmarket Aston Martin for a downmarket VW Beetle. New film Skyfall has 007 abandoning his shaken not stirred martini for a much less classy Heineken. Yeah, can't wait for the next one where he's sucking back Bacardi Breezer. I'm not sure why the producers are so keen to drag the quality down, but even the Bond girls aren't as hot as they used to be. I love the look on his face. It's like she's just whispered to him, "You know my nickname is Corgi Galore." How's this for advertising fine print? On the Slurpee machine in my local 7-Eleven. Apple shown above is illustrative of flavour only and is not an ingredient of the product. Yep, we guarantee there's no apple in our apple drink. In fact, it's healthier to just lick your iPhone. Normally on Gruen, we'd come up with an intelligent reason to play a ridiculous ad for a Korean farting baby doll. But then we realised, hang on, it's a Korean farting baby doll. How much more reason could you need? Coming soon to Mattel, Pull My Finger Barbie. Gruen Planet, shopping comes alive. Now let's welcome our panel from Y&R Brands, Russell Howcroft, and from Leo Burnett, Todd Sampson. They're joined by Harry M. Miller Group CEO, Lauren Miller Salento, and marketing bloke and occasional propagandist, Toby Ralph. Tonight, in a massive surprise, we're going to talk about Alan Jones. Because we're on the ABC and it's compulsory. The infamous comment about Julia Gillard's father dying of shame set off a media firestorm. We're not going to focus on those words, but on the ones that have followed. A case study of screw-up, apology and fallout. Let's start with Sunday's extraordinary press conference.
Well, first, to kind of thank you for coming. I just want to say that when all of this broke, if that's the word, I was encouraged to make a statement, issue a press statement. I've chosen not to do that. I thought I should be here and answer whatever questions are to be asked.
Oh, yeah, he's doing us a favour. Thanks, Alan. That midday press conference, which came on the back of a Sunday Telegraph article, was held at 2GB. Not that you would have known it from the lack of signage. Toby, what would have been wrong with just issuing a statement?
Well, he should have given a very short, clipped press conference. He needs to appear, but he should have turned up, accepted the blame, apologised, recontextualised that it was a private dinner party, said it won't happen again, then shut up. Instead, it turned into this sort of waffle-a-thon. He'd taken this verbal Viagra and he just kept going for three-quarters of an hour.
The problem would have been if he had have just issued a press release, then there would have been calls for him, come on, you know, face the music. So there would have been huge pressure on him after a press release, and you never know what might have happened at that press conference. It could have gone for even longer.
There's no doubt that it's very difficult and a skill and an art to apologise without apologising. And to do that, you got to be able to talk it out. You need to be able to explain, you need to be able to divert, and that doesn't happen in black and white print. It's much easier if he can go live. He talks for a living. This is the perfect forum for him. He's basically extended his show for another hour.
Yeah, it did end up being an editorial of up to 40 minutes, and he did take Q&A, absolutely. But it ends up also bringing in a lot of other issues and the reasoning why he is anti-Julia Gillard, and a lot of that came into this press conference.
Well, Lauren, your company had Jones as a client for a while, and he's a family friend.
Yes, he is.
Did he consult anyone beforehand?
So I think there's probably three people that Alan Jones would have spoken to. He's already said that he found out that the story was coming out at 11 o'clock that night. So let's assume that a PR person in his camp made that call to him. I think after that, to plan the press conference the next day, that person would have done that. Second to that would have been either station management or his production team at 2GB. And thirdly, probably called Tony Abbott.
He wouldn't have called Tony.
It was Sunday morning. Tony would have been out riding his bike.
He'd have been in his budgie smugglers, that's right. He wouldn't have called Tony. He would have spoken to a media advisor. I think you're right. But frustrating, he's one of those clients who wouldn't take advice. No more frustrating client than that. You know, he clearly didn't pay attention to the advice.
He is a spin master. He doesn't need to take advice. If you think about how he works, he's probably one of the best marketers in the country, hands down.
It's very
He
important.
chooses issues, he targets those issues, those issues are related exactly to his target market on the right. He hyperbolizes those, gets a big fury, and the same thing happens every time. The people rust on even more, and the ratings go up.
The press conference was supposedly about apologising, and though a lot of people have labelled it a non-apology, let's assume Jones went into the room with good intentions. Here's the actual mea culpa.
Can I just say this, that there are days when you just have to concede and man up and say, you got it wrong. And on this instance, these are remarks which I shouldn't have repeated. To repeat them was wrong. To even offer any impression that I might seek to diminish the grief that a daughter would feel for her father, independently who that daughter might be, is unacceptable. It shouldn't have been said, no matter who it is. The fact that it's the Prime Minister, I suppose, adds an extra dimension to it, but I think any daughter, you'd actually come to the same conclusion, because it may well be that those sentiments sought to dilute the grief that a daughter feels, and I'm now very mindful of that.
It's the vibe, it's the Constitution, it's Mabo. He's literally only a minute in and it already feels like a lost cause. He does everything but actually say the word sorry. Why, Russell, why would an expert communicator be so bad at communicating?
Well, he's actually an expert in long-form communication. When he goes to work and the clock starts at 5:30, he's got to talk for 3 hours. It's not like an ad person. An ad person tries to think of 3 words that summarises the issue. That's not how he does it. He wants to think of as many words as he can in order to not summarise the issue, in order to fill in time.
This style has earned him millions. This is not poor communication on behalf of Alan Jones. This is the brilliance that makes him make $1 million, which is this kind of rambling, hypnotic kind of way of speaking, peppered with a few facts and lots of hyperbole.
I mean, it is captivating. It was like watching an episode of Lost.
Yeah.
He's like, where is he now? Has he been dead this whole time?
He has an amazing skill where he's able to be confusing on the things that he doesn't want to talk about and crystal clear on the things he wants to talk about. It's a huge skill.
I think Alan Jones is a good communicator, but his real skill is as an outrage monger. You know, he's really good at whipping the suburbs into a frenzy of head nodding. I mean, his job is to be an opinionated dickhead, and he did it particularly well in this instance.
But his opinion is, I mean, he just bolsters the opinion that's already held by that core listener base. You know, they already think this. I'm not sure if they want him to actually apologise. And if you listened to his show in the days after, you know, back on air, on the Tuesday, a lot of callers said, mate, you've done the wrong thing. That's my opinion too. You did the wrong thing. But they said, keep going. We need you. Don't give up. You know, these are the words of his, you know, his listener army that are loyal.
Jones spent most of the following 45 minutes answering questions, trying to distract and deflect. But instead of owning the words that got him into trouble, he presented himself as a mere conduit for someone else's thoughts.
These are remarks which I shouldn't have repeated. To repeat them was wrong, but that shouldn't have been repeated. I repeated what I'd heard earlier in the afternoon. I shouldn't have repeated the story. It shouldn't have been repeated. I, foolishly, with my experience, shouldn't have repeated.
He didn't make the comments, he just repeated them. And then he repeated the fact that he repeated them. It feels a little like blame shifting. We've talked a bit about apologising in this series. Todd, what are the rules?
Yeah, well, you either deny, deflect, or accept. And in this case, he's accepted the fact that he shouldn't have said that out loud. But he is cleverly... This is a masterclass in spin, so he is deflecting to all other areas. So he's brought up Gallipoli, he's brought up people are mean to him, he's brought up that Julia hasn't returned his call. He's even spun Tony Abbott being involved by saying this is just another Labor attack.
Jones stopped short of saying Julia Gillard deserved the vitriol, but did claim that unlike himself and Tony Abbott, she was somehow quarantined from public disapproval. He obviously doesn't listen to his own show. He then issued chapter and verse on why we should disapprove of her.
Untruths about the asylum seekers, East Timor, a carbon tax, the budget surplus, and then the young people who died in the pink vats. I mean, the AWU think awful problem with Gruen, the Malaysian sluice, fuel watch, and the tax system, and the electricity prices going through the roof.
I've ordered way too many issues from the factory. Now all of them have got to go. Russell, if you're there to apologise to a person, what impact does it have if you spend most of the time slagging them off again?
Well, he's actually just talking to his constituents. In the end, he's back to type. He has his show every morning, and this is what he says every single morning. So he talks to his constituents, and then the next day they ring in, they say, "We're with you, Alan." Yeah, and that's what's going on here.
This is not an apology. This is an ad for the Alan Jones show.
Yeah. The people complaining aren't his audience. The people complaining are a completely different audience. He's made a lot of enemies in the media, and they think, great, this is a fantastic chance to get stuck into Alan Jones.
And that's another point, of course, is that when Alan Jones calls a press conference, everyone will go. So that's one dynamic, which is going to extend the length of the press conference. Plus, the media loves talking about the media. It's, in fact, their favourite pastime.
Right. Well, in fact, tonight we're the media talking about the media talking about the media. Weird to the very last drop. Here's how the press conference ended.
Can I just apologise for comments of mine leading you to muck up your weekend? So, thank you for everything, and go Canterbury.
And that was all the grand final motivation the Bulldogs needed. They lost. Although one of the Bulldogs did try to chew off Billy Slater's ear so he didn't have to listen to Alan Jones. Jones wrapped up with a smile and was grinning as he walked down the corridor from the room. Odd for a man trying to communicate contrition. The only time he'd said a simple sorry was when he couldn't hear a reporter's question.
Sorry? Sorry?
See, it's that easy, Alan. You're all communications professionals. Todd, could you actually use this as a how to not do a press conference?
In terms of apology, he gets 2 out of 10. But in terms of spin, he gets 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I don't know, Todd, whether that's his intention. I don't think he walked in there thinking this is going to be an advertisement for Alan Jones. It may have turned out that way.
What do you think his intention was walking in there?
His intention was to actually get in there, apologise and get out, but because...
That would take 30 seconds. I'm sorry.
He did not go in there with the intent for it to be an Alan Jones advertisement.
I think now we're deflecting that it's his genetics that caused him to talk around it. I think that he went in there strategically. He's got some very smart strategy minds around him, and he knows as he's speaking to an audience that is rusted on really well, and this was a strategic play, for sure.
That's how it finished up. I don't think that's how it started.
Jones is close to opposition leader Tony Abbott.
So I've been a friend of Tony Abbott's for 25 years.
On Sunday morning, pollies on all sides condemned Jones's shame comment, but it took Abbott all day to respond. Now, Toby, you've worked with a lot of Liberal election campaigns. What would have been going on in those hours?
Well, Tony was probably asleep and then out running, I'd think, early on. Certainly he'd have been briefed about what happened. He probably read it in the paper, but then he'd have been briefed by his chief of staff, who'd have said, this has happened. They could try and conflate you and Jones, because that's what the media will do, and that's certainly what the other side of politics will try and do to you. And Tony Abbott would probably have kicked the cat and felt a bit sullen, because it's not of his making. I mean, should a political leader be held responsible for the behaviours of his supporters? I don't think so.
Abbott chose not to front the cameras on Sunday. He released a statement saying Jones's comments were completely out of line. Jones apologised with a little more clarity when he returned to the radio yesterday, and Abbott clarified his views on the original comment as well.
What Alan Jones said was wrong, unacceptable, offensive.
Julia Gillard, on the other hand, stayed silent. According to Jones, she refused to take his call. Toby, did she do the right thing?
Her dad's just died. This prick just said something horrible.
Yeah, that's right.
And dignified silence is the best way to respond, I think.
And not that she's the Prime Minister. She doesn't just answer calls from everyone.
Absolutely.
I mean, he is a radio personality. He's not the Pope. And you wouldn't...
Imagine if he rang her up and she goes, oh, sorry, I'm just on the phone with Hamish and Andy.
But Russell, you tend not to pick up calls from people that say they'd like to put you in a bag and dump you at sea. You know, I mean, they're not the people you pick up and go, hey, how you going?
But
Why
her
would she
silence,
pick it up?
Her silence is a communication strategy that she uses often, and I think in this instance it was the right thing.
The Jones Show pulls in $2 million a month for 2GB. There were calls on social media across the weekend for advertisers to pull their accounts, a form of organised protest becoming more and more common. Jones had this to say about his sponsors.
Well, the advertisers aren't queuing up to pull their advertising, so that's a matter for the station, and I'm very confident that the station understands quite clearly what my position is on a lot of issues, and that the advertisers equally understand that, and it'll be business as usual.
Within 24 hours, it was anything but business as usual, and the advertisers were queuing up. Pulling out included McDonald's, Harvey Norman, Coles, Telstra, Mercedes-Benz, Hyundai, Honda, and a bunch of others. Often in this sort of situation, an advertiser will pull the money from one show but put its ads elsewhere at the same station. So the right thing is seen to be done, but nobody loses. Russell, can you see that happening here?
In part, I can see that happening here. I mean, it's very important for the advertisers that 2GB, and in fact all media outlets, are successful. The advertisers need the media outlets because they need to have the listeners in order to sell product. And so, yeah, I can imagine them shifting the money. And then it's, you know, it's not long-term punishment, is it? You know, it's like, look, you're suspended for 3 weeks, but after 3 weeks, come back. That's fair enough.
I think it's great that social media has made companies accountable to people, but I don't think it's smart or a good idea to make freedom of speech accountable to companies. Yes. I think that there's a big challenge in that, and I think that if these companies are worried about freedom of speech or what these people might say, then don't sponsor a shock jock on radio who is a serial offender. Yeah.
Of course, if Alan Jones wants to know how to get the press back on side, he need only ask one question. What would Palmer do? What would Queensland billionaire Clive Palmer do if he wanted a friendlier press? He'd threaten to start his own newspaper called Rage! Which he did in July. Or he'd remind the local rag he's more important than supermarket ads, which he did in March.
I can't make page 2 or 3 of the Courier Mail because I'm not a lettuce, or I'm not a carrot.
Maybe not, Clive, but sometimes you're bananas and nuts. Gruen Planet. Try it, love it, or your money back. Now the pitch where we dare ad agencies to take on difficult real-world briefs. This week we've asked for a campaign to convince Australians to introduce compulsory organ donation. Can they do it? Please welcome from Meerkats, Hannah Muirhead, and from Hammond and Thackeray, Matt Gill. Welcome. Right, Hannah, how did you sew this one up?
Well, this was actually a cause that our agency were really passionate about. And we think that if every Gruen viewer who watches the ad and gets inspired by our idea, updates their Facebook page and tweets the hashtag at the end, we can actually make a real difference to this cause.
Great, let's have a look.
There are approximately 2,000 Aussies currently on an organ waiting list. If we don't get more donors, many of these people will die. It's okay, we've got a plan. It's called Give to Get. We think the law should be, if you're not willing to give your organs, then why should you get anyone else's? It would first require that you find a way to show you're willing to give your organs. This is now easier than ever. Simply update your Facebook page under life events. Then, if you need an organ someday, the only way you can get one is if your family can show the doctor your Facebook page that says you're a donor. If you support the Give to Get idea, tweet hashtag Give to Get right now.
Give me moving shoes to make me sway.
I like it, nice. Matt, how did you get it on ice?
Well, being a healthcare agency, we approach this the same as we would any other brief. So what we've produced tonight, we really hope will sway people's opinion and make them think seriously about organ donation and maybe even save a life.
All right, let's have a look.
You'd save Jack if you could, wouldn't you? What about Ben? Becoming an organ donor could help save up to 10 lives like Ben's. But every year, 1 in 6 people who could have been saved by an organ transplant dies. Compulsory organ donation could change this. Register your support for compulsory donation, because every life is worth saving.
Great job. Great job. Russell, two different approaches, one campaign, one ad. Which did you prefer?
I'm going to go for Hannah and the Facebook. I think it's very, very clever and it's very modern, obviously.
Lauren, what about you?
For me, I think that the strategy behind Hannah's is so accessible, and so that gets my vote.
Toby?
Matt's idea will change minds, which is wonderful, great ad. Hannah's idea will change behaviour and save lives. I'm with Hannah.
And Todd?
Give to Get is now one of my favourite campaigns that we've done. Yeah, I'll go with that one.
All right, brilliant. Well, congratulations. There you go. Thank you to you both. That's how the panel saw it. You can have your say on Facebook or Twitter, or forever hold your peace. Gruen Planet, built by Australians for Australians. This is Spin Cycle, where we contemplate 3 recent moves on the publicity chessboard. At number 3, Capcom, makers of video game Resident Evil, which this week promoted its new game with a pop-up butcher shop in London selling, look away now if you have a weak stomach, human meat cuts. Yeah, there's another kind of organ donation. I'm vegetarian and I would eat a human. You know why? I have licked them and they are delicious. Can't argue with that. At number 2, mumbling pensioner Bob Dylan, whose new album Tempest is being advertised with mobile phone geolocation technology. Listeners can unlock a free track from the album by visiting any of the 100 places around the world tagged with Tempest artwork. If you've got a spare fortnight and enough cash to visit a dozen cities on 5 continents, you can hear the whole album. Personally, I'd like to see Bob Dylan do an iPhone ad and hear him try to talk to Siri. At number 1, pharmaceutical company Pfizer, which pulled one of the marketing boners of the year. It's almost sweet how naive brands can be. The company, which owns canine painkiller Rimadyl, has launched a new website, the unfortunately titled rimadog.com.